Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to Navigating Tariffs with Confidence with KPMG. My name is Colin Mahin, and I'm a Director of Programs at the Nasdaq Entrepreneurial Center. And for those of you who may not know, the Nasdaq Center is a nonprofit improving access and knowledge in entrepreneurship to advance economic progress for all. As you're going to see in the chat in just a moment, the NASDAQ Center provides programs, resources, and exceptional mentorship to help entrepreneurs fuel prosperity no matter where their journey begins. Be sure to check out those links and resources shared in the chat. I'm going to launch a few polls to take a step back and take a temperature gauge on how all of you are doing today. We use this information to guide the programs we provide for this global community of entrepreneurs. The first poll, how are you feeling about your business? Are you optimistic? In survival mode? Let us know. And thank you for voting. We'll get right to putting together resources to help everyone. If there are specific topics or challenges you'd like us to create resources for as well, feel free to share them in the chat with us. We'd love to see what else you've got going on. Also, a couple of housekeeping notes. First, let us know where you're dialing in from in the chat. We'd love to see where everyone's joining us today for our time. Secondly, we're going to have live Q&A near the end of our session, so feel free to submit those questions for us at any time using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to get to as many as we can. All right, the second poll, based on current events, are you reimagining your go-to-market strategy or thinking about global expansion differently? Well, with tax or with tariffs on the brain this morning, this is an interesting poll. A lot of you are saying yes, unsure. Thank you for sharing. And we have got to get one more poll for you, but while you're answering, I'd like to take a moment to recognize the incredible support of our corporate partners. The work we do at the center wouldn't be possible without all the amazing generosity and belief of our partners and funders, including Nasdaq, Wells Fargo, JP Morgan Chase, KPMG, Walmart, the Asia Innovation Hub, Wilson Sonsini, the Nareit Foundation, and BPM. We're deeply grateful for their partnership and hope you'll join us in sharing that appreciation as well. All right, just looking at the results from that last poll, looks like finance is at the top of the key, followed by scale. And those are two topics that I believe our presenter will cover some on. So without any further delay, please join me in giving a warm welcome to our special guest presenter. Jason Given is the Senior Managing Director of Trade and Customs at KPMG. Jason, welcome.
All right. Thanks, Colin.
And over to you.
Happy to be here. And thank you for this opportunity to present to you all today. Wow, it's been a wild year so far this year when it comes to tariffs. And thinking about through the disruption we've seen, the confusion and the chaos. And I'm here today to kind of talk through some of the things that we have seen, what led us up to this point, and what we see going forward, and how companies can kind of weave their way through and navigate the tariffs that are happening. So as I mentioned, it's been a wild ride, and right from the beginning of this administration, we've heard things like President Trump say his favorite word in the English language is tariffs, even greater than love. We've seen right from the inauguration day, almost daily announcements on tariffs. And this past week has been a bit of reprieve with the shutdown. So we haven't seen anything recently, which has given us a little bit of a chance to catch our breath a bit. But you see here, it was all throughout the spring, and we had Liberation Day back in April, where tariffs were announced on all countries, through the summer, where it just seemed like something was happening every other day. And at the same time, Customs and Border Protection are collecting a record number of tariffs. And this is really making a point. And there's a couple of questions out there on the why behind the tariffs, what's happening. how can this administration seemingly just across the board independently put tariffs on products, seeming without any kind of rhyme or reason? Some in the industry are saying that this is intended to be a replacement in revenue that was decreased by the one big beautiful bill, and not having the rollback of the income taxes this coming year. So that revenue stream, by not having the income taxes increased in 2026, needed to be replaced. And this is a way for the administration to implement a sort of consumption tax instead of an income tax. Most countries in the world have a value-added tax or a consumption tax of some sort, except the United States. Well, now, with the advent of these tariffs, most of the costs are being passed along to us, the consumers. So that is kind of a little bit of an insight into the why. And then if we can get into the how, the administration is really using three major pieces of legislation in order to bring in these new tariffs. So you may have heard items such as a 301 or 232 or the term IEEPA. And I'll talk about each one of those. The 301 refers to Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974. So we're talking 50-year-old legislation. And what it says is that the president can enact tariffs, or they can take maneuvers to go against a country that is practicing an unfair trade practices. And in this case, this was done during the first Trump administration against China. China was seen as participating in unfair trade practices by the way the government was subsidizing some of its suppliers in order for the suppliers to gain market share in the U.S. And that's known as countervailing and anti-dumping. The China unfair trade practices is the way it handles its intellectual property rights and trying to copy U.S. intellectual property. So in the first Trump administration, the 301 tariffs were placed to the tune of 25% on most products coming from China. And we fast forward to this year, there have been two different types of tariffs in addition to those 301. The first one is industry-based, or Section 232. And Section 232 refers to Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. So we're going even further back into the past. And what that says is that if there is a national security issue coming into the United States, then the administration can place tariffs on those items on an industry basis. But what it requires is an investigation by the U.S. Trade Representative. So the U.S. Trade Representative needs to investigate whether or not there is just a national security issue. And there have been several such investigations launched. Some have been concluded to the effect of examples of steel and aluminum and automobiles, as you see here. And then the third piece of legislation that the administration is relying upon is known as IEEPA. It's the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977. Again, nearly 50-year-old legislation. And what that says is the administration can declare a national emergency under certain circumstances and take necessary measures to mitigate that national emergency. And in this case, the administration has announced a couple of different national emergencies. The first one is the fentanyl trafficking issue, and that was placed on the border countries, Canada, Mexico, and also China as a producer of the fentanyl. A couple of the other national emergencies initiated was specifically on Brazil, where the administration placed a 40% political tariff on products coming in from Brazil. And then also India. There's because India is purchasing its oil from Russia, the administration has placed an additional 25% tariff on products coming from India as a attempt to deter India from purchasing Russian oil. I've lost my mouse. There we go. So as we move forward, just getting into some of the details in the current landscape, in addition to or stated by the administration, and that was the imbalance in trade. And this is something that goes back to the Nixon administration, where the administration has used an imbalance in trade as a reason to initiate what we'll call punitive tariffs on imported products. So we talk about some of those 232 investigations that are currently in effect. And these are the ones that are hitting industry specific, regardless of what country these products are coming from. Now, there are a couple of exceptions. If goods are produced in Canada or Mexico and they are under the US Mexico Canada, the USMCA free trade agreement, then they are not subject to some of these tariffs. But you see, the investigations have already been put in place, and it's been the U.S. Trade Representative has ruled that yes, there are national security issues involved with these specific industries. So we have the aluminum and steel put in place. You have the automobile parts, copper, lumber, and more recently, we're talking about cabinetry and upholstered furniture coming as early as next week on those specific investigations. We have some other investigations that are out there, and the one in particular, two in particular, that are really capturing a lot of attention is the pharmaceuticals 232 investigation and the semiconductors investigation. So pharmaceuticals historically are not subject to tariffs and duties. So this is an entire industry that is not accustomed to paying tariffs at all. So once this investigation comes through, it's going to be really interesting to see how the pharmaceutical industry adapts, and it's really going to affect a lot of cost structures within the pharmaceutical industry. We're receiving a lot of inquiries from pharmaceutical companies right now because the administration, the rationale for this is the administration wants these companies to move their manufacturing to the U.S. And especially in the case of pharmaceuticals, the pipeline and the infrastructure is simply not there, and it could take as much as 10 years in order for a company to rebuild its infrastructure to bring manufacturing here to the U.S. What we're hearing specific to some of the pharmaceutical companies is a letter went out to the top 15 major pharmaceutical companies a few months ago, asking them to come to the table to negotiate. And we've heard some of the larger pharmaceutical companies have already initiated those negotiations with the administration in exchange for a waiver of these expected 232 tariffs. So we're starting to hear, and we all hear Trump as the writer of The Art of the Deal. He's very interested in making these one-off deals and negotiations and business deals with companies individually and also with countries. So the reciprocal tariffs are put forth on all countries, and so that was enticing some of these countries to come to the table and negotiate with the administration. And what we've seen is the EU came to the table and established a trade agreement allowing it to reduce the reciprocal tariffs. And if you recall, there was an interview with Trump at the Rose Garden where he put a big poster together showing all the countries and the trade imbalance and the reciprocal tariffs that are going to be put in place for those. That was an effort to get those countries to come to the table to negotiate trade agreements directly on a one-by-one basis. The administration feels that it has its best leverage if it negotiates these deals on a one-off, one-by-one basis. So that's kind of the nuance there of why the administration is putting all these tariffs in place. It's an effort to aim high and then come in and agree to a lower tariff rate. And we've already seen that in the case of the EU. There's now a 15% tariff on most products coming from the European Union, whereas a year ago, though, the average duty rate was under 5% for goods coming from the EU. So, and the EU during this negotiation was happy to get 15% because originally it was upwards of 25%. And so this is just one example of the negotiating tactics that are happening right now. So on this chart, we see the various country-specific reciprocal tariff rates that are out there. I know one in particular that is particularly painful for a lot of my clients is the 39% from Switzerland. We're fielding a lot of calls from Swiss parent companies that are looking for ways to strategize and mitigate that 39%, which is, historically, again, the historical most favored nation rate were, below 5% for most products. And now companies are looking at, in the case of India, 25% plus the additional 25% for the Russian oil issue. So Indian companies are now paying 50% tariffs on products coming in from India. This again is subject to change as these companies come to the table and negotiate. You can see Japan, for one, negotiated a deal to get down to 15%. 15% seems to be the floor for these negotiations as we go through. So as more countries come to the table and negotiate, we'll probably see more of these higher rates get down to that 15% threshold. Some of the countries that have already come to the table, I've mentioned Japan, I mentioned the European Union, but Philippines, South Korea, Indonesia, and the UK have all come to the table and made some kind of offer in exchange for reducing the reciprocal tariffs. So you'll see in all these cases, they're under the original announced rates, which was 20% in most cases. And but again, much higher than the historical tariff rates that were in place a year ago. So there was a little a wrench thrown into the works by the Court of International Trade. Court of International Trade had weighed in, and there were, as you can imagine, a lot of lawsuits that were put forth for these, arguing that these tariffs were unlawful. The Court of International Trade agreed, and then it was sent to the Federal Court of Appeals, and the Federal Court of Appeals upheld that back in August, stating that these reciprocal tariffs were too broad, and that the IEEPA, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, was not intended to give the administration blanket authority to simply across the board apply tariffs to all countries for something along the lines of a trade imbalance. So what we expect to happen next is the Supreme Court is going to weigh in and hear on this issue in the next month or 6 weeks, we expect. And then that will determine the path forward for these tariffs. And what we feel is generally, if the Supreme Court comes back and strikes it down, then it'll be business as usual, and the administration will be able to continue with these IEEPA tariffs. If, however, the Supreme Court agrees with the Court of Appeals and the Court of International Trade that these tariffs were in fact unlawful, then they would no longer be able to collect these tariffs. They would be halted, and then there would also need to be some kind of refund mechanism put in place, because if they're deemed unlawful now, that means that they were unlawful right from the beginning. So we expect the confusion and the chaos to continue for the time being, especially if there is some sort of a refund process that would need to happen post-November. Whether the court agrees or disagrees, we feel that the tariffs are going to continue in one form or another, if not under the gauge of the IEEPA. The administration will likely increase the number of 232 industry-specific tariffs or investigations, combined with those country by country negotiations, which are continue to are ongoing. So there's a lot of these tariffs are put in place. I've mentioned a bunch of different ones, and it brings up a concept known as tariff stacking. A lot of these tariffs, the 232, they overlap with the IEEPA tariffs, and so there's a cumulative effect that could be happening. And that was not really the administration's intention for these tariffs. So if you have a product, subject to the automobile 232, but also a product made of steel or aluminum that's subject to those 232 investigations, those are some of the things that could end up really hurting a company upon import, where if you're adding 25% and 25% and plus 20%, and it really becomes cumbersome to do the calculation. So the administration came out with a roadmap, so to speak, stating that which tariffs are attributed in the hierarchy. So if a product meets, for example, the automobile tariff, then it's not subject to any of the other 232 investigations. If it's not part of the automobile and auto part, but it is an aluminum, steel, or copper or lumber product, then the content within that product, let's say 50% aluminum, 50% steel, well, the 50% aluminum will be subject to the aluminum order, and the 50% steel would be subject to the steel order. Again, they don't overlap each other, but they're concurrent. And then if none of those meet, but then Canadian, Mexico, I mentioned there's the USMCA free trade agreement would not be subject. And in some cases, the country by country is in addition to what's known as that most favored nation tariff. So that's the most favored nation is the historical tariff that was in place prior to this administration. So if it was, a 5% tariff on a product, now you're getting the IEEPA tariff 15, 20% on top of that 5%. Then there are some other agreements, such as European Union, where the cap is the 15%. So if that most favored nation was duty free, the IEEPA would be 15%. But if that most favored nation was 5%, then the reciprocal or IEEPA would be an additional 10 to bring it up to that 15% overall tariff. So just a couple of illustrations here on what that tariff stacking is. And we have the one that I wanted to point out is this one in the middle here with the cable or inner wire from China. And what that is we have the general rate of duty, which is free. That's the MFN rate. And then you have that historical Section 301 tariff of 25%. That stacks on top of the IEEPA tariff, which is the fentanyl tariff of 20%. That stacks on top of the steel content tariff of 50%. So you have that cumulative effect of the 25% plus the 20, and then you have an additional 50% on the steel content. So we're going to get beyond just a description of the tariffs and what they are, and talk about the impact that we're seeing on the importing community. What we have here is it's really having a big effect, and it's costing some companies, the smaller companies, their business as a whole. We're seeing an increase in operating costs, supply chain disruptions, and pauses. Companies are trying to shift their supply away from China, which was one target, but also away from some of those higher tariff jurisdictions to lower tariff jurisdictions. We're seeing profit margins erode. There's volatility up and down within these markets, and really a lot of companies, what they're seeing is it's just the uncertainty involved in everything. We don't know what the administration is going to announce yet. So there's all that uncertainty is causing a lot of headaches across supply chains. We're seeing some countries are retaliating and putting in tariffs of their own for U.S. exports. And then we had that issue with China specifically, where there was a back and forth throughout the spring, to the point where there were upwards of 150% tariffs placed on goods from China. And that really was not seen as a tariff, but more of an embargo, because it just didn't make sense for Chinese companies to even ship to the U.S. at that point if they're going to be paying a 150% tariff. And then you have legal and compliance complexity. There's a lot of these rules being put in place, and the administrative process behind it to get it right upon declaring into the U.S. has been very problematic. We're seeing a huge increase in errors in customs filing, and it's causing a lot of pain and a lot of headaches for U.S. importers. But even that, beyond that, there's tax implications, supply chain considerations, financial statements. The companies are looking at their transfer pricing, which is the price between a related supplier overseas and a related company here in the U.S., to see if there's any way that there any flexibility in the price that the related party overseas is charging the U.S. in order to reduce that duty impact. There are tax implications, intellectual property implications across the board, where there's certain imported products have non-dutiable charges associated with them upon import. So now companies that were historically tariff-free, i.e. pharmaceuticals, are now looking into the accuracy of their pricing upon importation, because these tariffs are based on the import price being declared. So if there's a way to remove certain charges or fees from that import price, companies are interested in hearing how they can work through those processes. So how do they do that? Well, leveraging technology. A lot of companies are getting into what we call tariff modeling scenario, where there is a scenario planning and looking at different tariff impacts based on volumes coming from countries, and increasing or decreasing volumes, and looking at their overall supply chain. And they're utilizing technology to kind of help them understand what the tariff impact is today compared to what it may have been 6 months ago, and also forecasting into the future what that would look like. So companies are really trying to get ahead of the actual tariff impact by forecasting and scenario planning accordingly. So we gotten through that aspect of what companies are doing today. Now it's more along how companies are optimizing their strategies for reducing or the tariff burdens. And the one thing that we are seeing on the customs side of things is audits are coming. The CBP, Customs and Border Protection, are really increasing their enforcement tactics and the number of reviews and audits that are happening. Customs is hiring a new field audit agents, and they're being told to go after the revenue. And as you can see, the total revenue collected from audits in 2025 has already outpaced previous years by a significant margin. We think this is only going to continue. Customs sees a lot of the areas as low-hanging fruit, and it's just a matter of time before Customs gets the resources that they need in order to really up the ante here and get that kind of revenue collected for them. Meanwhile, what we're doing is we're talking on several different strategies with our clients about how they can optimize their own tariff strategies. And some of the most popular strategies that we talk to our clients about, number one, by far and away, the most popular strategy right now is the first sale for export. And I'll go into a little more detail of what that means in the coming slides. But some of the other strategies that we're talking to our clients with involve foreign trade zone, which is allows a company to get some cash flow savings, where they can designate their property, their warehouse, distribution center, manufacturing plant here in the US as a foreign trade zone, which means they can bring product into that area without declaring customs, without paying tariffs, and the tariffs and duties will not be payable until those goods leave their facility for a US destination. So the benefits there are if that company is then exporting that product, they would never pay the tariffs. And if they're shipping it to a US destination, the tariffs become due, but there's a time value there, a delay between the tariffs normally being due when products are imported at the port of destination versus the time it takes to carry through their facility and then ship to a customer. We're seeing companies review their country of origin now to determine if they can shift manufacturing from a higher tariff jurisdiction to a lower tariff jurisdiction. One of the more popular strategies is cost unbundling. I had mentioned earlier the stripping out intellectual property costs or any costs that are not directly related to the production of the merchandise itself can be stripped out of that cost calculation, and therefore reducing a company's dutiable value and the duty that they're paid. Duty drawback is another one that's quite popular, and that states that a company has the right, if they import a product, pay the tariffs, and then re-export that product, they can petition the government for a refund of the tariffs that were paid. So I did mention by and away the most popular strategy is that first sale for export. So this one here is allows a company in a multi-tiered transaction. So that means if there is a factory that's manufacturing the product and they sell to a foreign, what we'll call middleman company or a distributor, and then that company on sells to a US importer, the US importer would pay the middleman for the product, but would be able to declare the value that that middleman company paid to the original manufacturer, provided that certain requirements are met. And the first of those requirements is that there is a bona fide sale between the factory and the middleman, and also between the middleman and the US importer. So there needs to be, we can't have companies set up shell companies to establish this. So there needs to be purchase orders, invoices, and payments throughout the supply chain. The goods also need to be clearly destined for export to the United States at the time that they are sold. And what that means is that those products that are being sold to the US importer can't be diverted to a distribution center or another country. They need to be shipped directly from the manufacturer to the US importer. And in the event where the factory and the middleman company are related, there needs to be evidence that relationship did not influence the price charged by the factory to the middleman. So there needs to be an arm's length transaction. And that arm's length from a customs perspective is a little different than an arm's length standard from a tax perspective. What we frame it as from a customs perspective is we look to determine the circumstances of sale. And the most common way to determine that circumstances of sale is to see if the manufacturer recovered all of its costs plus a reasonable profit. And by reasonable profit, it's a profit that's equivalent to that company's parent company's overall profit for merchandise of the same class or kind when shipped to the United States. So there's a complicated review that needs to go into those transactions for related parties. And then lastly, there needs to be a full documentation trail, record keeping. And we think that this first sale for export, as I mentioned, has really gained popularity amongst importing companies this year. And what we're seeing is companies are able to dig in and strip out 10, 15, 20% of their margin between that factory and middleman entities. So therefore, they're reducing their tariff burden by that 15, 20%. This is an area where we feel customs is going to target with their audits going forward. We think the enforcement is going to come down on companies that are simply creating a first sale structure without that proper documentation. We know that Customs has the right to ask for production records at the manufacturer. They have the right to ask for um, financial books and records of the distributor company. And companies that are not taking the time to fully document this process are the ones that are going to have their first sale eligibility negated by Customs going forward. So that's something that we want to make sure companies are on the lookout for when it comes to first sale for export. I mentioned the foreign trade zone, and some of these slides, and we can make these available for distribution after the presentation. I mentioned the foreign trade zone is also quite popular amongst your larger importers. You know, all the big box retailers are getting involved with foreign trade zones. A lot of all the automotive companies are already involved in foreign trade zones with their manufacturing plants moved here. And now we're starting to see companies in other industries considering foreign trade zone as an option, pharmaceuticals being one of those entities. Country of origin planning, and then the cost unbundling that I mentioned. And what this does is it allows companies to strip out charges that are not related to the production of the goods. And an example there is inland freight. There could be banking fees, handling fees involved, foreign taxes or interest charges, and in certain commissions and that are put in place where a payment could be made, but it's not related to the actual products and therefore should not be part of the dutiable value upon importation. One other item, and then this will be the last item I just want to touch on, is strategic tariff classification. And what this talks about is a company has the ability to be strategic about how it is classifying its products. Now, the classification is upon importation, the product needs to be described to Customs so the Customs can apply the proper tariffs. And this is described that there's the harmonized tariff schedule where all countries in the World Customs Organization have agreed to have a specific code associated with each product. And the tariff book has 99 chapters in it, ranging from live animals in chapter 1 all the way up to complicated, machines and industrial products. And what a company is permitted to do is strategically classify its product and manufacture its product so that it meets those classifications that are associated with a lower tariff number. So there's companies are looking at how they can, for example, a subassembly could be a lower tariff rate than a finished product. Companies would finish their subassemblies in a country and then bring those subassemblies into the U.S. for finishing. There could be some activities that would allow for that type of a classification. There was one case where a company was importing cargo vans, and the tariff between was lower for a passenger van than it was for a cargo van. So the company installed seats in their cargo vans, and then once those cargo vans were so that they could be described as passenger vans upon import, and then once the vans got to the U.S., the seats were stripped out and they were sold as cargo vans. So that's not exactly the what Customs had in mind when it says you have the right to strategically classify your products, but companies are getting creative and companies are getting aggressive with their stance on a lot of these processes. One of the more aggressive nuances that we've heard recently is the situation around steel and aluminum products, steel and aluminum derivative products. And what companies are doing, the tariff states that the tariff on steel and aluminum content is only based on the content of the steel within a product. So if a product is 50% steel, then you're only paying the tariff on the 50%. But what the aggressive approach is that steel is only the cost of the raw steel that the manufacturer is incurring. So any manufacturer profit overhead markup labor to turn that raw steel product into the finished item is being stripped out from the steel content um, number of the price, and therefore companies are reducing their tariff burden by being strategic in that respect. And at this point, I think that is what I had for content today, and I can turn it back over to you, Colin, and we can open it up for live questions.
Awesome. Well, Jason, first and foremost, thank you so much. What a great overview. If you want to stop sharing your slides, we can see your smiling face for a Q&A. Let's see. We got some great questions, and if you haven't dropped them into the Q&A box, do so. We'll get to as many as we can in the time that we have. Let's see, Jason. First one, does 232 steel copper tariffs includes articles of iron slash brass?
So that's a great question, and a lot of companies are segregating out the cost structure between them. So the iron and brass, the steel and aluminum 232 investigation has specific tariff numbers that are listed within the order, and most of them are in the specific chapters specific to steel, specific to aluminum, chapter 73 and 76. So items of brass are outside of that those items. So I do know that the brass is included within the copper field. So we would look to see if those specific tariff numbers are included in the order or if they're excluded.
Awesome. We got a lot of questions around 232.
Mhm.
Great to have an expert here. Let's see. Another question here from Valerie. Understand that under 232, finished products made of steel can actually be only subject to tariff on the value of the steel, not on the finished product. Can you comment on this?
Yeah,
And
that's right.
how, as an importer, the invoicing should be handled to thus minimize the tariff charges?
Yeah, so under Chapter 99, which is where all of these 232 tariffs are sitting, there are specific tariff numbers that go to the steel content, and the way that an importer is to report that, and most importers use a customs broker to facilitate this information, and the customs brokers have automated programming to make sure that they get it right. What it says is there are two different numbers that an importer would apply to. So let's say it's 50% steel content. So the 50% of the value would go under the steel content tariff, and then 50% would go on under the an other non-steel tariff content. And that's how importers are taking that approach to reduce their cost under the steel derivative 232 investigation.
Amazing. And follow up from that from the same person related to my first question, does FSFE only apply when there's a middleman involved, or is there anything regarding a direct importer?
Yeah, first sale for export, there needs to be a multi-tier transaction, and it could be multiple middlemen. I mean, there could be the largest I've ever done was 6 different tiers of transactions. But generally speaking, you need a manufacturer selling to another entity, and then that entity on selling to the U.S. The most beneficial way that works is if the manufacturer and middleman are related, and the middleman can take on a lot of that margin. So it's not just profit, but there's other distribution charges and insurance charges, anything that can get stripped out of that original cost of the materials. But there does need to be that multi-tier transaction in order to, there has to be multiple sales in order to claim a first sale.
Awesome. Another question. These are all great questions,
Yeah.
folks. If you could drop them into the Q&A so they don't get lost in the chat, that would be awesome. Question here from Max. Jason, is labor and overhead eligible for cost bundling separation?
So labor and overhead at the factory is no, because it's direct, the direct cost of the product is the direct materials and the direct labor. So there it would need to be an arm's length transaction from the factory to the importer. generally, an unrelated factory would include that overhead in their profit margin to the importer. So the things that we like to strip out would be there could be some marketing fees. So if there's a royalty that's paid for use of a trademark, for example, can be excluded from the dutiable value because it's considered a sales cost after the product is imported. I don't know if you can hear me, but it looks like we lost you, Colin.
All right, I think he'll probably join us in a second, but let's keep it going. So, staying on kind of this theme, we have somebody asking, is labor and overhead eligible for cost bundling separation?
That was the question that
That was
we
the
just
question
addressed. Yeah.
we just addressed. Okay, thank you. So okay, then let's go with how are brokers declaring the parts that have steel from different countries?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's one country of origin for the product, and then when companies are, they would basically the short answer is they separate it on separate lines with on the entry. So there would be a different line for country of origin India versus country of origin Spain. I'm just picking two countries at random, but they would be separated by line item
Okay.
because there would be there's separate tariff number associated with each of those countries.
Okay, so that's good to know, kind of like needing to identify for your unique situation. Amazing. We have someone here. I'm in pre-production. My product is a garage door screen produced in China. How do I determine tariff costs? And this is, a very specific question,
Mhm.
but just any kind of insight on, how somebody might determine tariff costs for their specific product, things to keep in mind.
Yeah. So what I would first things first is you would want to make sure you have the proper classification of that product, and that would be not only the garage door screening, depending on what the product is made of. If it's steel and it sits in Chapter 73, then you would go to Chapter 73, find that most favored nation tariff. Then being China, I mean, I think China the current rate is 55% overall. So, but you would want to take a look at or have a broker take a look at the Chapter 99 codes specific to your product, specific to the China markup, and then calculate that based off of the cost.
Awesome. Yeah, that's pretty straightforward. So, hopefully, if that's something that you're thinking about, you can kind of follow that template there. Another question here. How do you see tariffs reshaping global aluminum supply chains, particularly with China's export policies and U.S. secondary production growth?
Yeah, I mean it's really going to be interesting to follow this whole thing through completion. And the goal is to increase the U.S. production of steel, aluminum, and their products. And the administration has always been targeting China first and foremost in order to try and pull um, production away from China. China wants to be the leader of the world in all things production and take over as the leading economy in the world. We see China as a geopolitical adversary. The U.S. does. So anything that can be done there to stem that growth is seen as beneficial to the U.S. So if it can be replaced with U.S. production, that's even better. But anything outside of China is better than being in China is kind of the view of the administration.
Awesome. Really helpful. Amazing. We have another question here. Do you foresee A lot of litigation coming given the reclassifications, audits, and interpretations of product. Is there a mechanism in place to address those? Or could this significantly create business overhang? Thoughts there?
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of headaches and heartaches as customs ramps up and gets the resources to run these audits, because we know a lot of companies have made mistakes over the course of the last 6 months in, importers and brokers alike, just not being able to keep up with all the changes. Mistakes have been made. And one of the things that we recommend to our clients is a post-entry review, going back and looking at what was declared. And there are software packages that can be used to help with looking at that. A company can obtain its import data directly from customs. It's known as Automated Commercial Environment, or ACE. It's a online portal that companies can sign up for, username, password. They log in and they can see all of their import history over the past 5 years just by running reports. So one of the things that we do is we take that information, we run it through our our own systems and software, proprietary, and then we can identify issues, errors, anomalies, for our clients and help them get ahead of it.
Really, really interesting. That's great that you can kind of like look that up and see that information. That's really, really amazing. Awesome. Got a few more minutes here, so keep those questions coming in. We have another question here. I think this is kind of like a clarification on something that we were talking about, like the Section 232. So for aluminum and steel mentioned 50% additional tariffs. Does that mean additional to the MFN?
Yes, it does. It does. It's in addition to the MFN.
Awesome. Wonderful. You mentioned driving and accelerating value through tariff strategy. Could you share an example of how clients have used these analytics to achieve measurable cost savings or supply chain efficiently?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing company specific, under, first sale for export. A company is purchasing $10 million worth of product or $100 million worth of product from a supplier, and they're able to strip out. This is particularly in the pharmaceutical industry, where the markup is quite substantial above what it costs to just make a product. So that markup is now sitting in the middleman company instead of the manufacturer. It's known as a toller manufacturer. So the manufacturer is hired to just produce the product. So if they're producing the product for $100, and then the middleman tacks on a 300% markup, and it's now $400 to come into the U.S. instead of declaring the 400. Companies, if they're able to do get the documentation in order and meet the requirements, they're now able to pay the tariffs on the $100 coming out of the factory. We're seeing companies save millions of dollars by employing this strategy, and across all industries. It's the first sale for export concept has always been popular amongst apparel and retail, or apparel and footwear, because those most favored nation rates are typically 10, 12%, or even higher in some cases. So pharmaceuticals, for example, duty free historically, now looking to be hit with reciprocal tariffs, or even a potential 232 tariff situation. Now those companies are starting to look at how do they rearrange their supply chain in order to accommodate a first sale scenario, and place that large margin in the middleman company, where it can then benefit the most. And we're seeing companies save millions of dollars in this by employing this.
Really, really interesting. And we actually have another question that's kind of specific to this of, is this person's for e-commerce trading invoices, if you're filing under first sale, is it possible to put all sellers in one voice with the middleman, like as the buyer, and then giving the fact that there are probably hundreds of sellers for one entry, it would be too many documents to upload for the entry packet. Any thoughts there?
So I would probably need some clarification on that. If you have a consolidated entry, upon import, let's say you're, FedEx importing from a bunch of different suppliers and you're placing it on a single entry, the first sale would be associated. You would have to go back to all 100 suppliers in order to get the first sale value for them.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so hopefully that's helpful there. And I think we have time for one more question. How does stacking work for a product subject to Section 232 steel derivatives when the steel is smelted in the US? Does that make the product exempt from the IEEPA?
Yeah, there's an exemption for U.S. steel content, provided that I think the number is 25%, could be 20%. Provided that there's at least that level of value derived from the U.S. content, you can strip out the U.S. content from the import value, and it would not be subject to the tariffs.
Got it. Awesome. So definitely make sure to look into those exemptions. Jason, this has been so wonderful. Thank you for packing in so much important, actionable information for folks to start thinking about right away. So as we close out here, if you had just one key takeaway or piece of wisdom you wanted to leave with everyone here today, what would that be?
Yeah, I would say plan ahead, right? Really, and if you're not involved directly in the customs function, find out who within the company is, and have those conversations. What are we doing as a company to mitigate these tariffs, and is there anything that we can be doing? And plan ahead, and get a hold of your information, and be able to run those scenarios, and I at least know what the impact is to you and your company.
Awesome. Jason, thank you so much for setting such a great overview on behalf of the Nasdaq Center and everyone here today. We are just so thankful that you joined us for this topic.
Thank you. I was happy to be a part of it.
Awesome. And to our audience here, we would love for you to join us for upcoming webinars, which you can view using the link that's going to be posted in the chat here. And thank you all so much for joining us today. We look forward to welcoming you back online with us soon.